Mm-hmm. Mate, John, I've had nothing but trouble with you guys since day. Every time I call you, there's a new I've spoken to John. Every time I call through, you transfer around the business. Mate, I'm over it. How often have you had that kind of discussion with a customer? Whether you as a customer, a client, or of course you as an employee, we've all experienced these difficult personalities or complex scenarios. And I think a big part and a big theme of you've joined us today at Academy, big theme is about complaints. And today is about not just complaints, but the management of complaints. We're going to look at a few things today. We're going to talk about some of the personalities that you deal with. We're going to talk about the ways that you can deal with those personalities. And we're also going to define the difference between a complaint and a grievance in considering the concept of perspective. Perception will play a big part in how we look at complaints. And it does. The very nature of the word complaint implies negative connotation. You think complaint, you think frustration, anger, someone's whinging, etc. So it can be a difficult thing when we talk about complaints, but it doesn't have to be that way. And in particular, as you can see today, I want to take you on this journey as we look at the complaints. Think about the department of the complaints. And most importantly, ask the question, what it is, and how do I go about responding to these complaints? And that is today's theme. Excuse me, I wish to make a complaint. Of course, before we dive into that, we need to address this negativity, this connotation of the word complaint. And that comes into play here. And I present to you this. A simple puzzle. You have 9 dots on the board that you can see. What I ask you to do is this. I'm going to give you probably the next 30 seconds. So if you need some more time, feel free to pause the clip and you can wait for the result. But I'm very interested in you engaging on this one, and I'd like you to draw a maximum of 4 lines, and you must join every dot in the grid. So you're presented with 9 dots here. Draw them on a piece of paper. You must join all the dots using a maximum of 4 lines, and you cannot lift your pen off the paper. So join the dots, maximum of 4 lines, and you cannot lift your pen off the paper. So have a think, what is it that I need to do to achieve this? No doubt you're drawing lines through dots at angles and you're trying to get it, but every time you do it, you keep getting to 5. And you will find that 5 lines tends to be the norm. How do you do it? How do you think outside the box? Perhaps that's the way we have to do it. All I've done here is extended the line. The actual fact was there never was a box. There never was a box. It was simply your mind that was creating the box. What you were doing is you were drawing the perimeter around the edge and then confining yourself to that box. Unfortunately, that has created limitations and you couldn't really come to the solution. Perspective here plays a big part. How you look at the box is going to be a big, or makes a big differentiation in terms of you getting the result. And the same thing applies with a complaint. We do need to look at a complaint from a different perspective. We have to think a little bit outside the box. You know, we have to think a little bit about the difference between not only a complaint, but a grievance. Because the problem is that people associate complaints with a negative. It doesn't have to be if you look at it from a fresh perspective. And we look at it from this one. As you can see to my left here, you've got complaints and grievances. What is the difference, I ask you? You've heard of grievous bodily harm and you've heard of grieving, but grievance is not a commonly used word. The challenge here with grievance is that it's the issue. The complaint is the noise. It's the frustration, it's the angst, it's the difficulty, it's the anger, it's the swearing, it's all of these things that you receive from your customers. This is what we define as the complaint. Now, the challenge of all this is that the grievance is the noise. The challenge with all this is that the grievance is the issue. It's the problem. And very rarely do people come to you with the grievance, with the problem that they have. They surround it with noise. You have to filter through all of this noise, and you need to be able to find what the actual issue is. And today we're going to be talking about what that issue is, and we're going to be separating and exploring those two in detail. Now, of course, when you're dealing with interesting personalities in the workplace, you deal with a number of different perspectives. There is angry people, there is talkative, manipulative, etc. These are all parts of the equation. Now, what you need to think about is, how do I manage all of these people? And make no mistake, these people are at home, these people are in the workplace, these people are your colleagues, these people are your customers. Think about the ones that you see here for a moment. Think about the party hat. Think about the different pictures that you see, and understand that we need to be able to adapt to not only these, but hundreds of different approaches of styles of personalities and individuals. How on earth do we do that? Well, let's take a look. Before we know that, we need to know what they want. And of course, you might wonder, well, what's the secret? What is the answer? What do my customers want? When your customers complain, they do want something. What it is they want is going to vary on the individual, of course, and your organisation. But when they complain, there's a few general things they're after. And you might think about that. For one thing, a big deal is the apology. Customers want to hear, "I'm sorry." And this is an important part. An apology goes a long way, as you know, with your customers. It instills trust and faith in your organisation. There can be a challenge with the apology because it can be forced, or in some cases you could apologise for the wrong things. And what I'm getting at there is that there are careful approaches you can take to apologies in the business. You don't want to be going down the path of claiming 100% liability and responsibility, when in many cases it may have been something well and truly out of your organisation's control. So how do you apologise and yet not make it look like you're passing it off as something irrelevant and beyond all means of your control? Well, there are some approaches you can take. The apology is about apologising for something, and that's the trick. With an apology, you might apologise for the inconvenience, you might apologise for the situation, you might say another word. In fact, what I tend to do a lot is cross empathy with apology, and we're going to come to this in a little bit more detail later, when I might say something like, "I appreciate the experience you've been through so far." That shows acknowledgement, it shows that you're there, and it doesn't necessarily link and rely heavily on an apology. But of course, an apology will go a long way. So let's face it, it's going to be a big part of what customers want. Some customers want to vent, and that's part of their routine, it's part of the situation they might be in. They feel like they need to vent, get something off their chest, talk about the challenges they're experiencing, etc. And these are fair comments, these are fair points that they can make during their vent. It might go on a bit long, and it might be difficult to manage and listen to, but it's telling a story, and I'll get back to that point shortly. These complaints are in fact a story of what's happening in their experiences and lives right now. Venting is one. Another thing people want is the refund. And of course the refund is there. It's the return of money. It's the promise that has not been met. And the difficult thing is, of course, your businesses and your organisation may not always be able to give a refund. It may not be as simple as that in all cases. But the refund is there. It shows that you're giving something back to the customer. Could be a monetary amount, or in some cases you might use terms such as goodwill or gesture. And they do work well, particularly when customers ask for compensation. So in this case, we're actually going a step further. We're not just saying, "I want my money back." No. We're saying, "I want my money back and I want you to reimburse me for my experiences." And I actually had that once where I had a customer for a previous organisation that I worked for. I dealt with them numerous times over a difficult problem they were having in our business, and they invoiced me for their time. So what we found was that they wanted to charge the business for all the time and bad difficulties they'd had in trying to get their issue resolved. And I can understand that you can appreciate that frustration. But I suppose the biggest factor is us working out, well, what can we do and what can't we do? What are our limitations and boundaries? Compensation and refunds both fall into that area. I suppose in my perspective, it's been more about goodwill and gestures. In our experiences, we work out what is a goodwill, and how can we give goodwill, I should say. How can we offer that gesture to our customer? Is it a credit? Is it an apology? A verbal goodwill, if you will. Is it a promise? Is it calling them back and staying with them? So a goodwill doesn't have to be a monetary amount. It can be simply your services, going beyond the call of duty and trying to get the issue resolved, most importantly, for the client. That's a compensation perspective. Of course, people want it fixed. They want the problem fixed. I mean, that's obvious. They've called for a reason. They have a complaint. They want it fixed. Now, most importantly, when do they want it fixed? Well, in 2013, it's now. It must be fixed now. In fact, no, that's not good enough. It must be fixed the day before yesterday. Before I knew it was a problem, it should have been fixed. This is a usual experience. We are used to this in the modern day. We are used to internet banking, we're used to instantaneous communications, and we're familiar with the technologies around us. So we want that, and we want it now. And that's a big challenge. Customers want it now. Linked to that, not only do they want it now, but they don't want it to be happening again. Customers want your assurance that this issue, and they will ask this, I want you to assure me, John, that this will never happen again. Simple thing to say, difficult thing to answer. It's how do you promise something? And the reality is you can't. Your business cannot promise. Your business cannot promise that an issue will be fixed now, and first of all, that it's never going to happen again. You'll do your best to try and resolve anything, and we try to minimise the problems and the impacts in the future. But you know very well that's not something that you can promise easily. Now, of course, all this comes into play when we talk about the types of personalities that we work with. And as I mentioned before, a complaint is a story. The noise and the frustration and the challenge that you hear is the experiences that go with it. It's a story. And in many cases, the story that they see, and the story that I'm showing to you right now, has its ups and its downs. It has a bit of emotion at the beginning, if you see there. It has a little bit of a going around in circles that you'll see in the middle, repeating yourself perhaps. There's some more emotion in the middle there again, you will see. Some angst perhaps. You see the nuclear cloud there in the middle. Maybe that's just a bit of angst of emotion of the story. And then at the end there, you go around in circles just one more time, just explaining the issue again and hoping that it sinks and that it sits well with the individual. Now, of course, the story, we'd like it to go relatively straightforward from woe to go, left to right. The story of the complaint, unfortunately, is not always that simple. The very reason, of course, is the people. There are people involved with this story. The people that we engage with on a day-to-day basis. Some of them are angry customers. Some of them might look a little bit like this. They're frustrated and they're angry with you. And their story, as you can see there, replicates that. Let's take a look at one example.
These two are about to find out. Their plane's been delayed.
Hopefully it's going to be a little bit earlier. That's what I hope.
Are you kidding me? That's like 6 hours of my time.
Sit around here for 6 hours. I'm not going to sit out here for 6 hours. If I just stay out here for 6 hours,
And then
I'm going to go it's Friday. Can I check these in right now, or I can give you guys a refund? That's like, give me a refund. Are you
Now, think about this for a moment. Think about the angry personality. The passenger in this case is a classic example at an airport where things are going wrong. The plane has been delayed, has been cancelled. The day has ended poorly, and now I've found out that I'm not going to get home tonight at all. People get frustrated, people get emotional. These are normal emotional responses, I suppose, to problems and to difficult situations. And here we've got the angry personality. You'll see the storyline is emotion, it's swearing, it's little squiggles of passion and rage. And it's kind of what you just saw there in that scenario. Now, how do you respond to that? We're going to talk a little bit about some of the approaches you can have for each of the styles. But let's think about this guy for a moment. Well, first of all, what's his story? You know, there's more to it than just the clips that we're seeing here at the airport. Other things have occurred during the day. He needs to get home. He's been in a wedding. There can be a number of factors that contribute to one individual's irrational behaviour. Now, I'm not giving the individual an excuse for that behaviour, but I'm giving you the understanding that perspective plays a big part. You putting yourself in their shoes, I suppose, is getting a feeling of coming from this side, what would I do, and how would I behave? So with the angries, we find that quite difficult because they get angry, they swear, they accuse, they abuse, and in many cases, potentially, they might even swear at you and just really make your day terrible. So the angry people are difficult, but there are ways to approach them. We'll talk about some of those tactics in a moment. So we've got the angries. Of course, we've also got the manipulatives that you'll see down here. Mr. Burns, I think he's the perfect, yes, excellent. He's this perfect persona that we can have for the manipulative. Conniving, adaptive, sneaky, manipulative personalities and manipulative complainers come across that way. And I suppose our challenge is working out the best way to respond to these individuals. Notice the storyline for a moment, and you'll see quite clearly with the storyline, it's direct. You've got some elements of the lines of curving there. You'll see that it goes up and down a little bit. You'll see the emotion, the story. It's a little bit different from the angry because you're not seeing that squiggles of rage and emotion. But what you do see at the end, if you can notice there, is that right at the back here, it's coming back to the beginning. It loops. And this is actually what happens in these conversations. When a customer will start with a general query. They might start up with a general conversation. They'll say, yes, look, here's what I want. I've spoken to John about this. The planned product is this. What are some services that comes with? Oh, okay, right. What do I get when I buy this? Oh, okay, right. And if I did sign up for this service, what would I? Oh, okay, right. Because when I bought this, I didn't get any of that. I have not received anything that you've just promised. And so what's happened is the customer there has turned it around. They've used a general inquiry, but then tried to turn that around and say, well, no, look, that's the expectation. But your business hasn't met that. And here's the problems that I have with that. So manipulatives can be quite tricky in this case. You need to be able to manage that personality and stick to the facts. It doesn't make it easy, but it's about finding the facts, finding the right information. And that's just one angle on the manipulative personality. Now, another type of personality that we can look at is the talkative. The picture says it all, really. It's wandering, it's incoherent, it's messy. This storyline is different from the first two because there is much less structure. And that is a replication, really, of a talkative individual. Little fact, little points, wandering conversation. The difficulty, of course, is knowing how do we deal with them? How do we control someone who is engaged in such wandering conversation? Before we look at that as a negative, we must consider that the talkative are actually quite friendly individuals. These guys are people that relate to people really well. They are people that you can converse with. They talk about your business to their friends. They talk about your business to people around them. And sometimes, whilst they take up a lot of your time, they can be quite good proponents for your business. The talkatives, of course, need to be managed well, and we'll talk about some tactics with those particular personalities as well. The next personality, of course, is the assertive. And the assertive is probably very well known in your organisation, in your industry. The assertive is one personality who is focused and who is direct. And if you look at the storyline, it replicates that. They like the detail, the bullet points, logic, and concise. They need points. They need it to be done. They need to be done now. And they don't want to be talking about it for days on end. That's a big part of the assertive personality. Difficulties with managing them, of course, does come into play here. And that's what we're going to talk about is, well, how do you respond to these personalities? And mind you, this is not just for your customers, but your colleagues as well. You yourself has probably been one of these personas at some point in communication. And today it's about looking and reflecting on some of those responses. The angry, of course. Let's take a look at the angry personality that you see here. And some tips there. It has to be calm. Be calm. Easier said than done with an angry. When emotion is involved, irrationality tends to go out the window. And just think about some of your discussions that you've had at home with your loved ones or your family members. I'm talking about, of course, the arguments that usually begin over a bathroom towel or something so obscure, something so minuscule, but build up. The reality is they build up because you are angry, because you're emotional, but more so because you're emotionally involved with those people. I would argue that in the workplace, you have some benefits in that you're not emotionally engaged. Well, I hope you're not as emotionally engaged with your colleagues and your customers as you are your family. So that gives you something to play with. I think it gives you some reason to be a little bit more rational and a little less emotional with the people you're dealing with. And that's about being calm. Allowing room to vent is an important one. Giving them that room, allow them the space to let it off their chest. If that's a minute, if it's 30 seconds, if it's 2 minutes, obviously you need to take control at some point of the conversation, but the venting allows that. It gives them that space, and once people have vented a little bit, you may find them a little bit more responsive to what you're about to say. Maybe a little bit. The third one there is the apology. And you'll see there the idea of apologising. I've talked about this already. It's what customers want. How do you word the apology is up to you. Are you going to apologise for the inconvenience? The classic CityRail regrets the delay and apologises for an inconvenience caused. Even CityRail have stopped using that in terms of their transportation messages. They tend to just have the updates on the clock boards. So we tend to find that we're moving away from this cliched, I apologise for the inconvenience caused. There are other things you can apologise for or appreciate. I like to drop in that word quite a lot, this idea of acknowledge or appreciate. So again, you might apologise by saying, I apologise for the situation, or I appreciate the situation, or I apologise for the experience that you've had. These are all simple twists of words that you can play with to give you some clout, I suppose, in managing the angry personality. We've all been angry from time to time. They swear, they can be abusive, and they can accuse. And I think at the end of the day, it's about stepping back a little bit from that emotion and not being caught up in the frustration of a customer. These customers may often let out, and at the end of the call, they might say, I'm not angry at you. They might say, it's not you I'm angry at, it's the company I'm angry at. Though we tend to find that they won't bring that point up until the end of the discussion. And that can be a challenge. So a big point to consider here is, particularly with the angries, is knowing that patience is important, being calm is there, allowing room to vent, and not taking an association to words that you typically would. So for example, a swear word, vulgarity, these are just words. Words only have the inherent meaning that we place upon them. So think about what other words you could replace with that. Simple technique goes back to something I believe called the pumpkin theory, where you could use the word pumpkin to replace other words. As silly as that sounds, you can use whatever word you wish. But the point is, you're taking away from the impact of those words. Manipulatives. Now you'll notice that be calm is there as well. And I cannot deny the importance of that. Being calm is still an integral part, probably with all these personalities, because calm shows rationality, it shows prowess, it shows that you are there and you're listening, and it shows that you're not just over fussing with situations, you're not getting entangled with situations, you're remaining at a level, and a level-headed situation is what we're talking about. You write quality notes. Cannot emphasise this enough. Tricky individuals can be responded to quite simply by good quality notes, good quality information. We're of course talking about the call notes that you keep, or the records that you keep, or the data that you record on conversations with colleagues, with customers, with managers. You need to keep good records, particularly with these individuals, because you need to rely on the facts. If you can't back the facts up with evidence, you cannot manage the manipulatives very easily. So that's a really important one, is to think about the quality of notes. I remember a situation with a previous company that I worked for. I was the day supervisor, my colleague was the night supervisor, and what actually happened was he had a call at the end of the night. It was a difficult customer, irate, angry, frustrated. The call went for 42 minutes. It went well beyond the operating hours of the business. Now at the end of the call, we take notes. We record notes based off the discussion. My colleague ended the call notes. Instead of call end, he wrote, "Customer is a prick." Now, you're probably sitting there thinking, well, that's pretty obvious. I mean, I'm not going to go out there, Shane, I'm not going to go and say the customer is a prick. But the reality was this came from a guy who'd been in the business for 6 years, a supervisory level, experience in the industry prior to this. This was not some new individual in the organisation. And he let the frustration and the emotion get to him. He let this customer get to him and unfortunately recorded that in notes. Indirectly, 6 months later, the same customer took our business to court. Not for the related matter, it was actually nothing to do with that conversation. But I think you'll agree, having an overhead projector with the call notes of customer is a prick doesn't do your business any favours. It certainly didn't do us any favours on that day. And on that note, I sort of want you to think about that. Think about your call notes, your scribble pad, everything on your desk right now. If I was to come along and to collect these notes today and present them in a court of law for whatever situation arises, would they be compliant? Would they be compliant with your standard procedures and policy and your legislation? Because anything you record, you've written down, you've scribbled in Notepad or your emails, this is all record of communication, correspondence, and is evidence, and is probably the key that we can use to manage the manipulative personalities. So have a think about that in terms of your workplace. How compliant are you with your note-taking? These are the sort of customers that we need to be on guard for. We really need to have that stuff in play. The talkatives, of course, we've talked about them in terms of the Cookie Monster, but this idea of incoherence and noise is difficult to manage, and that's what we've got up here with the talkative. Remain friendly. Use closed questions. These are obvious things, but the idea of remaining friendly, it's just about keeping that level. It's mirroring the individual. It's still being talkative and having conversation and talking about the weekend and talking about the weather. And banter like that go a long way. Of course, you need to cut it off at some point. To do that, you might use closed questions, as you can see there. You don't want to be using open questions. You want to be direct, and you want customers to give you the yes, the no, the specifics, the dates, the numbers. And these are the kind of questions you need to focus on for the talkatives. At the end of the day, the talkatives are probably still going to give you a long-winded answer. They will go all around to try and come to this point, and they'll tell you about their mother, sister's uncle, pet dog that got admitted to the vet last week, and how all that relates to this particular situation. But at the end of the day, using closed questions will get the specifics. Ask for the data, ask for the info, ask for the information. the dates, numbers, times. These are all good facts that you can lock talkative people down to. Now, another part there, Scott, is interrupt and control where appropriate. You've got to interrupt talkative individuals. You can't let them go on their tangents and consume the business. They can be costly to the organisation and to your time. So bear that in mind. It's not being rude, but it simply is interjecting and redirecting the focus of the call. So you might say, for example, "Oh, okay, John, I'm sorry to hear that." Or, "Okay, thanks for sharing that. What I'll do is I'll get that information now. What's your account number? What's the," you're just redirecting, and you're accepting and acknowledging, and you're moving on. Some talkatives like to talk about all sorts of things. So I think that's a good approach to take in terms of managing the talkative personalities. Now, of course, the last one you'll see down there is the assertive. And the assertives, as we said, probably one of my favourites because you know where you stand. These are the guys that they give you the logic and the facts and the detail, and they want those things as well. And they're happy to work with you on that. So you'll see they stick to the facts. And I can't emphasise that enough with your assertives. Logic, coherent, facts, data-driven. These guys want the information, they want it now, and they don't want to fuss. They don't want to hear all the excuses in the world. And quite often we find they're quite level-headed. They get that policy X can take 3 days. They get that this product can be, or has these requirements or restrictions. They do understand that you run a business, and they do know that not everything happens at the drop of a hat. However, they want to know when you're going to do it, when's it going to be ready, and they want you to fulfill on that promise. And that's a big challenge with the assertives because you need to give them the answer, and often you may not have the answer. So window periods perhaps is one way of looking at it, giving people an estimation, so 6 to 10 working days. But I think the most important thing is the follow-up. Are you engaging with them at that point to make sure they're still with you on that journey? And that's a big, important part to manage the assertive customers. Now, let's think about this for a moment. Let's think about rationality and logic, because I've been saying those two words a lot today. I've been using these terms a lot. What is it? Well, I'll get you to think about this for a moment. Something very simple. 8 equals 6 plus 2. 6 plus 2 equals 8. Where am I going with this? What is the point of this? Have a think about the difference between these two. Now, these two are actually very, very different. And what you will probably come to the conclusion of the last 10 seconds is that, well, Shane, they're presented differently. Great, yes. What else? Okay, the result is first for one and the formula is first for the other. Okay, great, yes. What else is the difference? Well, it's represented differently. Yes, okay, we've been there, yep. Okay, it's written a different way. Okay, yes, yes, yes. There's something much more to it than that. There's something much deeper to it. One is a fact, I should say. One is a possibility. And you've probably worked out which is which. That is to say that 6 plus 2 equals 8. We know this, it's a fact. With mathematical rules, you cannot dispute that 6 plus 2 equals 8. However, 8 can equal 7 plus 1, 4 plus 4, 8 plus 0, 6 plus 2. These are all examples of perspective. So what I'm trying to get you to think about is that when you're managing complaints and managing difficult personalities, perspective and empathy go a long way. And that kind of brings us to one of our key points, and I go a summary for all of these personalities. If I was to nail 4 words that I think summarise the approaches that you need to take with these individuals and personalities, it's probably these. Rationality. Well, what is that? Rationality is being empirical. It's about being logical, proving facts. It is about sticking to some of those facts. Rational thinking is something that is very difficult in an emotional situation. How on earth can someone expect it to be rational when they are so caught up in the heat of the moment? The customer, unfortunately, doesn't have that benefit. We do. we are able to take that and stand back and say, no, I'm rational, I'm composed, and I'm going to be able to manage this individual or personality. Again, it takes practice. It may not happen for you immediately, but rational thought, it goes back to Plato. It's ancient Greece. It's about thinking on a level head. It really is about this idea of logic and fact. Empathy, of course, you'll see there as well, also plays a big part. This idea of empathy is about understanding. It is about appreciating customers. You've certainly used the phrase, I understand where you're coming from. And I hearken back to a scenario where I was working with a courier organisation, and a customer had called up and they wanted to send a shipment, in fact some animals, in fact a cage of monkeys, would you believe, from point X to point Y. It was basically a relocation of the circus. And unfortunately, one of the crates and containers actually was posted to Sydenham, but to Sydenham in the wrong state. So the customer received the package, but of course it was the wrong package. And the owner of the zoo was most frustrated with this. The employee said to the customer, John, I understand, what were you going through, what's happening right now. The customer replied with, do you have monkeys? Do you have monkeys? How could you possibly know what I'm going through right now? How could you possibly even understand that? Now, it's a great example where a phrase has been used, what I would think is a great phrase. It shows empathy, it shows understanding. But even still, the customer has questioned the integrity of it. The customer has questioned, how could you possibly be in this way? How could you possibly experience this? That's a fair comment. And it goes back to this idea that sympathy is different to empathy. They're often misconstrued, but the whole idea of sympathy is that you feel sorry for someone. Sympathy is about, you had that experience, oh, I had that same experience too, I've been there, your dog passed away, my dog passed away. I can sympathise with you on a different level. I don't know how many of you out there, and many of you out there I should say, I don't know how many of you out there have actually had your crate of monkeys go missing. Sympathy could be a hard thing, so empathy comes into play, but maybe it's just the wording we need to think about. It may not be, I understand where you're coming from. It could be something like, I appreciate, I recognise, I acknowledge, I understand. These are other words that you could put in place of the word empathy, of the phrase, I understand. So, I appreciate where you're coming from. I appreciate the inconvenience. I apologise for the situation that you've gone through so far. These are examples of using empathy relating to a customer, and not necessarily using the cliched, I understand where you're coming from. It's a good point to think about in terms of empathy. The next point you'll see on the slide there is patience. And of course the idea of patience is about composure and how patient you are with the individuals. How do you work with those individuals? How do you maintain that level of composure? And how will you best keep that patience? The idea, of course, is respect. It's right there on the screen. You'll see respect, you'll see patience. It's relating to people. It's giving them the room to breathe, and it's respecting that they are a customer of your business. And in many ways, you wouldn't be there if they weren't there, and arguably they wouldn't get the services rendered if you weren't there as well. It's a very mutual relationship, and I think that respect goes a long way in terms of your communication. Now, all of this again is about perspective, and I hope today is really got you to think about the difference between complaint and grievance. This idea that a complaint has to be a negative thing is not the case. Complaints, as you know, can be very beneficial to your organisation. They give you feedback and recognition for things that you need to improve. Of course, the problem is that there's a negative connotation of the word complaint and a confusion with what we're really looking for. We need to look for the grievance. You're listening for the problem and the issue, not for the noise that surrounds it. Perspective plays a big role here. How do you formulate perspective? For example, take a look at this puzzle. which way, this classic piece, which way is the woman turning? Is a woman turning clockwise? Is a woman turning counterclockwise? Depends on how you look at things. Some people definitely at the moment will be seeing it going clockwise. I, for one, am seeing it go clockwise. Some of you are seeing it go counterclockwise.